Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing week 39 of my 2021 reads. This week I read quite a few different books across quite a few different genres, so pretty eclectic, including a DNF. Content warnings and timestamps are in the description box below. First, I read Such a Fun Age by Reid. This is a contemporary book that talks about a lot of issues of racism and microaggressions and things like that really had taken BookTube by storm last year. So many people read this and loved it and were just raving about it, so I'd been pretty interested in picking it up, and Tori at Tori Morrow, who I will link below, said that she would buddy read it with me. Tori mainly reads SFF, especially focusing on like sci-fi, but she reads a lot of other things too, and we have buddy read before and loved it, so we were really excited to get to this together. It is a story that basically focuses on a 25-year-old black woman, Amani, who's just not really sure what she's doing in life, and so she's sort of babysitting on the side for a rich white lady who is, very feminist, very progressive, but also not. At the same time, she ends up dating this white guy who is, again, very progressive, very into black culture, all these sorts of things, but also not. So this whole book is really about the dynamic between the three of them and about the way that a lot of people who think that they're not racist do things that are inherently pretty racist, pretty structurally falling into those dynamics. So this book, I can totally see why everybody loves it. It has a lot of interesting things to talk about, and really, I think that the contrast of these, the white employer and the white boyfriend, and the way that they see race versus the way that Amani herself experiences her life and kind of her own priorities is pretty interesting. At the same time though, it was very interesting reading this with Tori because she had quite a few criticisms of this. So definitely check out Tori's channel because I think it'd be really interesting to hear all of the things that she had to say. But this is basically something where the author is making a point. She's talking about some experiences. That doesn't necessarily mean that the characters are exactly well fleshed out. They kind of play the role of the stereotype they're trying to represent. So there's not like a fullness of the characters. Also, the story it felt for me almost like a domestic thriller, which just wasn't so much my style, where you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for Amani to kind of find out what's going on behind the scenes. And some people are pretty atrocious in terms of their choices and their decisions. So it just had this kind of domestic thriller feel, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but it also made it a very readable experience. You start reading and you just kind of want to keep reading and see what happens. So this was kind of a mixed experience for me. I can totally see why a lot of people love it, but I could also see why it won't work for a lot of other people. So I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Relentless Moon by Robinette Kowal. This is book 3 in the Lady Astronaut series, which is an alternate history sci-fi series set in the 1950s, 1960s, mainly in the US, where there is a meteorite that strikes Earth and causes some pretty intense changes in the weather patterns, such that in a couple of decades life won't really be sustainable on Earth, and so that speeds up a lot of the exploration of space and causes a lot of international cooperation, as well as gives some more opportunities for women and people of color to be involved in science and the space race because it's just so important. So this is book 3, so I won't talk about too much of everything that has happened so far in the series, but this third book focuses on a colony on the moon, and they've got a lot of things that are starting to go wrong because there are some saboteurs who are part of the Earth First movement, people who basically think that governments shouldn't be spending money on the space race because they should be spending money on all of the people who are suffering at home because of displacement and all of these sorts of issues due to weather changes. So this book actually ended up being kind of like an espionage thriller type of thing, where we've got basically saboteurs, we have spies, we have people on this very closed space, this moon colony, trying to figure out who is sabotaging all of their systems and also trying to survive that, because when things go wrong on the moon, it's pretty dangerous. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of kind of action after action after action. It was a very, very engaging story, but way too intense for me. So even though I really enjoyed a lot of the science and I enjoyed a lot of what was going on and a lot of the themes, it was also so intense. I actually had to put this book down for a couple of weeks in the middle because I was just so stressed out by it. So if you like a lot of action, you like thrillers, this is such a cool science fiction book to pick up. Definitely the series is really worth reading. I gave this final book in the trilogy 4 out of 5 stars. Then, because I needed something gentle and cozy to calm down with, I picked up 2 novellas from the Holidays with the Wongs contemporary romance series by Jackie Lau, A Match Made for Thanksgiving, and A Second Chance Road Trip for Christmas. So these were super sweet and just what I needed. The basic premise of this series is that it follows 4 siblings who are in their late 20s, early 30s, and their parents have decided that they need to get matched up and get married right away. So the parents actually set them all up on kind of arranged dates, only for that to not go out so well. But each of them does end up finding their own happily ever after. So the first book, A Match Made for Thanksgiving, is with one of the brothers who ends up having a one-night stand with a woman. They live in Toronto, only to then find out when he goes home to his small hometown for Thanksgiving that that woman has been matched up with his brother for Thanksgiving, where his parents have decided that they all need dates. But they really have a thing for each other, and they end up really hitting it off, and they decide to ditch their own dates and pair up with each other, and really they form a relationship. So it's really about that idea of people who thought they were just looking for a fling ending up really liking each other and staying together. So this was definitely very sweet. I loved the parents and the grandparents especially. This is like a Chinese Canadian family, and there is so much family dynamics and banter, especially the grandma is very, very funny. The only thing that I wasn't like such a huge fan of was that the hero in this is a playboy before he meets the heroine, and I'm like not so huge on the playboy trope, but it was a lot of fun. So I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The second book, A Second Chance Road Trip for Christmas, I loved even more. This is a second chance romance. I think all of this series is going to be playing with a lot of romance tropes, but in a really cute and sort of very aware way. So it's a lot of fun. So this follows a different brother, and he is kind of a little bit taciturn, a little bit grumpy, doesn't say much. And he just is sort of not the best people person. But he ends up for Christmas being asked by his mom to give a ride to his old childhood sweetheart, who also lives in Toronto and is going home for Christmas to see her family, but her car just recently broke down. She hasn't had a chance to replace it. So they do that, and of course there is a snowstorm, and of course they get stuck at a hotel, and of course there's only one bed. And this is adorable. I really liked the way that Jackie Lau did this second chance romance, because they were childhood sweethearts, but you know, they went to college in different places, and then they went to grad school, and they were just like, you know, it's not working to do this sort of long distance thing, but they parted really amicably and they really liked each other. And this is 15 years later. They both had a chance to kind of mature as people, and they come back together and they realize, you know, I really like you as a person. And it was just so sweet, and the tropes were done so cute. It was just such a fun read. Just what I needed. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Mike by P.G. Wodehouse. This is a book that Sush, my husband, was reading out loud to me as a bedtime story, and we just finished that recently. Took quite a few months, but this is just the perfect thing for like a bedtime story. P.G. Wodehouse is an author who was writing in the first half of the 20th century, and he wrote a bunch of just really lighthearted comedy type stories. So Mike is one of his sort of schoolboy type of novels, and it follows some high schoolers who are at, you know, schools where they live away from home, they live in the dorms and everything like that, and just the sports and antics that they get up to. So Mike, the titular character, is really great at cricket, like absolutely amazing at cricket. And it follows him as he starts at a new school and becomes really great at cricket, and also gets into a lot of trouble with a lot of the other boys. There's actually two parts to this. So in the first part, he's at one school, and then in the second part, he transfers to a different school. I really loved the second part because he meets a new friend, Smith, who is just the most outrageous character. So funny. I really love the way that P.G. Wodehouse does absurdity and does sort of comedy of errors and things like that. So that was a lot of fun. Mike himself, though, really got on my nerves. This kid is so arrogant and so full of himself and constantly makes really bad decisions. So he wasn't my favorite, but I loved Smith. Also, this book is filled with so much cricket. So much cricket, so much cricket. And because I didn't understand a lot of what was going on in the cricket, I was definitely, maybe not that I wanted it, but I was informed by Sush of a ton of rules of cricket. So I now know so much more about cricket than I ever really wanted to know. But it was also very good for falling asleep too, because man, cricket is boring. So overall, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. If you want something light and humorous, P.G. Wodehouse is definitely great to pick up, and Smith is such a great character in this that it's totally worth giving it a try. Next, I read Measure What Matters by Doerr. This is a business book which is all about basically something called OKRs, or objectives and key results. And so it's an idea of how to set goals that are very measurable and kind of help push people while also helping them measure what they're doing. This is a pretty widely recognized, influential book within, especially I think, like the tech industry. And it has a lot of good ideas in it, really things about why it's important to kind of state clear goals with specific key results, these things of what exactly you're going to accomplish, to do it on a pretty frequent basis, to make sure that it's open and shareable amongst other people so everybody can kind of get alignment, and a lot of other things like that. So definitely a lot of good ideas in here. It also has many different, almost like mini memoirs of different business owners, different CEOs and tech people who talk about how they use OKRs in their companies, and specifically kind of how they worked through some of the issues of implementing them. So I thought that kind of focus on how do they work through actually getting these working, because it's not always easy to get everybody aligned on that. I thought that was pretty interesting. So those parts I really loved. The parts that were written actually by Doerr, less of a fan. He is that kind of typical white privileged male, lots of sports and war analogies, and just very full of himself. So that part, not a huge fan of. Also, just the thrust of this book is how to use these goals in order to gain as much out of people as you can. So really it's very capitalistic in that approach of how to eke out the most productivity out of everybody, which again I have some questions with, but the idea of how to set goals is a very good one, and I think really solid ideas in here. It was very, made me think as well about just my goals, my personal goals and my channel goals and my work goals and these sorts of things. So kind of inspirational in that way. So I definitely see why this is one of those classics. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I did DNF one book, which was Planetfall by Emma Newman. I was buddy reading this with Jagruk, who is a commenter, and I was excited about this because I'd heard really great things about Planetfall, but it ended up just not being quite for me. So this is a story that takes place on a faraway planet in the future. Earth has had basically a group of people who went to this planet and they set up colonies there, but a lot of the beginning of this book is very mysterious. You don't 100% know what's going on. You know, a couple of things, such as a lot of the technology is really based off of like organic 3D printing, things like that. But there's a lot of mystery about kind of how everybody has ended up there, and there's a lot of tension. This also kind of felt like a very suspenseful read for me. And especially after the other two books that I've read this week that were super suspenseful, I was just so tired of being stressed out. The main character also is dealing with some intense anxiety, which is very on purpose. You know, Emma Newman is somebody who was diagnosed very late in her life with autism and also has had a ton of problems with anxiety. And so that's coming through in the character. But it was so stressful to read that I was not up for that. I got through 32% of this and I was just so stressed out. I was like having stress dreams and I was just like, I just don't think I can handle this. Also, there was a scene that was full on gross body horror, where basically there's this kind of organic, I don't know what to call it, science space thing that is like a tree, and she goes into it and it is like being inside of intestines, and it was described for an entire chapter in really gross detail with like a ton of mucus, and I was just like, I cannot handle this. So I know that a ton of people absolutely love this book, love this series, but I think maybe it's not for me. Too stressful, so much anxiety, and some body horror, just not for me. Okay, so that is everything that I read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you want to read any of them, if you have any thoughts, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.